So, first thing you need to do is remove the battery. There's a hold down that has 10 millimeter. Back that off and the battery will come out. Don't do like this idiot and use a pry bar because it breaks your battery box. Yeah. Next thing you want to do is go over to here. This is your vent for your coolant. You want to turn that, open that up. Usually takes a wrench or a pair of pliers. And you turn that, and that'll come all the way out if you want it to, but it doesn't have to come out all the way out. Just far enough so that it helps it drain. Next, you want to get underneath the Jeep. I'll show some pictures here. And right here, you can see that's the drain for the coolant. Now, Mopar in their infinite wisdom put a little nubbin right here. You can see it. Usually a 17 or 16 millimeter will fit right on that. But here and on the opposite side, they put this little tab on here, which makes it impossible. I don't know why they did that. So the first thing I do is I just take a utility knife or something and cut it off. That way the wrench will fit. As soon as you get that opened up and it starts draining, you want to take this cap off. And that will let it flow out nice and free. And the next thing you'll want to do is you want to take the water bottle off. There's a hose here, hose here, hose here. And there's another one down here somewhere. Oh, there it is. Right here. And then there's the sensor that tells you the level. Next thing is when you pull this out, there's two nuts that need to come off. They're 10 millimeter, you need a deep well. Take those off. As soon as you remove this bottle, put those nuts back on the studs. That way you always remember where they're at. The preparation is key, right? So I'm doing this in a shed, basically. You get all your tools laid out. Hopefully that's all of them you need. And then you get an empty table. A long one would be preferred. So what I do is, as I pull stuff off, I start on this end. And I work my way out, right? So this is like, and then if I run out of room, then I go over here and I work on this side. And that way, when you go to reassemble, you know the direction that you need to go to put things back on. Always keep your nuts and bolts with the items that go with them. So here we are, getting ready to disassemble the engine to do a head gasket. I take the insulation off because you'll see in a little bit there I hang things off of this, so it comes in handy. It's pretty easy. There's little clips. You just pull the center out and then the whole thing comes out. Okay, got the water bottle out. Next thing we'll do is just start taking things off. So you got your vacuum pot for your turbo. Take that off. Gonna set it off to the side so it's out of the way. Hopefully it'll stay there. Yeah, probably not. Alright, stay. Then we'll take off the intercooler hose. Okay, so got the water bottle off. We'll start taking things out. We'll take the air cleaner box out. Take this off. Pull all that out. There's a hose here and a hose here that goes to your positive crankcase ventilation valve, PCV valve. You take all that out. Okay, so got the air cleaner out. This box is easy to take out, believe it or not. You may not think so, but right here and right here, and then there's another one at the very bottom. You can't really see. So there's 3 points. They're just pressed into rubber grommets. So you just kind of very gently wiggle and jiggle it. So this one has one of the tabs broken. Right there. It's supposed to look like that. I'm assuming either the factory broke it because they're idiots, or someone tried pulling this out because they were idiots, put it back in and broke it. Who knows? And then another thing you want to do is you want to clean this out really good with soap and water, get all those mouse turds out, and then plug that hole with aluminum screen. That keeps the mice from getting in there again. And I'll show you that. Mouse proofing your Jeep in another video. Okay, so we got the intercooler line off of the turbo. Next thing we want to do is remove this hose and the thermostat assembly and all the hoses attached to it to get to your intake. Okay, so got the heater hose off, going to the thermostat, or excuse me, from the thermostat to the radiator. These little lines are for your viscous heater. These need to come off because the viscous heater will eventually need to come off. So, this is the tool that you need. If you don't have one of these, you need to get one of these. So you just loosen them up, move these hoses or clamps out of the way, and we'll just start taking these off. Oh, and a little tip. So a lot of times these don't want to come out. The rubber will kind of, due to the heat, it'll fuse itself to the aluminum. So take you a pair of pliers like this, put them on like that, and very gently rock it back and forth until it breaks free. Very gently, you want to break your hose, and then it'll come right out. Okay, so since we are putting in an EGR delete, weeks stage 1 and 2, we unhook this. This whole thing is going to be gone. We're going to get rid of it. This hose, pretty much the same thing. It goes to a Y. You can see the Y right here. So this Y will be eliminated, and then this hose here will basically tie in to this bottom hose right there. And so basically they'll just be connected, and this whole thing here will be gone. Unhook all your heater sensor connections. Move your wiring harness out of the way. Back here somewhere. There you go. You're getting closer. Okay. Alright, so take that one off. That's your heater hose that goes from the water pump to the thermostat. Well, actually, the water coming out of the thermostat goes to the suction side of the water pump. To be specific, we get your pry bar in there, but be very careful. These two pieces here are plastic, and they will snap off really easy. Okay, now that this hose is out of the way and that hose is out of the way, this should just pop right out. Like so. And there's your turbo. Okay, so this is the inlet hose. This goes to the PCV. We're going to eliminate this. So this just comes off. I'll show you here in a little while. Take this off, put a fitting in there, and we'll run it to a Pro Vent, which will remove the oil from the crankcase PCV before it enters into the intake, which it's important to have a little bit of suction on your intake, otherwise this is what happens, it just gets clogged up. So we can fix that. Next we'll take the heater hose assembly and route it over here out of the way. I like to put it like tuck it up underneath here. That's out of our way. We can access all this crap here, and then we'll work on the driver's side after we get all this done. Next thing you want is there's an 8mm Allen bolt that you need to take out, and then loosen this one up so you can take the thermostat out. And there's 3 bolts for it, 1 on this side and 2 on this side. The bottom one is really tight up inside there. It's doable. Just use a socket. I use an impact driver to pull it out, and a wobbly usually does the trick. We'll take this stuff off, and I'll cut along here, and I'll show you a neat little trick on how to make this thing more serviceable. Okay, next we need to remove the fan. So you take an 1 7/16 inch wrench, put it on there like so. And turn it counterclockwise. The trick is, if you can see it somewhere in there, I'll show you. Oh, where is it? Okay. Right down here, where my finger is a 13mm socket. And that, when it's turned 90 degrees, there's a hole in here that attaches to the bolt that holds that in place. So you put that 13mm socket in there, and then this won't rotate. Make sure you turn that fan counterclockwise to loosen it. Just the opposite of normal. Okay, now that the fan is off and loose, we'll want to take the shroud off. And there's 2 bolts. One that goes there, and one right here. Take that off, and then this just lifts out and comes out. I like to do this with one hand. So, okay, now that the fan and shroud are off, you can see that 13mm bolt, or excuse me, 13mm socket, which is on the 13mm bolt that holds this on, which is essentially kind of like an idler. So, and it runs the fan. Yeah. Crankshaft has a bolt on it right here. It's either 21mm or 7/8. Depending on what side of the pond you're on. You can use that to time everything. Also, this is the perfect time to go down here and take a utility knife and trim off the nubbins that Mother Mopar put on the drain cock for the coolant. I don't know why they did that. A bunch of retards, but anyways, that's another story. Okay, now it's time to take off the serpentine belt. This is the tensioner. Put a 15 millimeter socket on there. Turn it to the right. Loosen that up. And you can slide the bolt off. Okay, with serpentine belt off, and with zero history on something like what I got, kind of bend that back a little bit, not too much. If you see cracks, replace it. Look on the other side. If it's really worn, replace it. If you see writing on it like this one, it's probably still fairly fresh. That's what's most important. Next, we'll remove the alternator. So there's a tab back there. You gotta lift up on it, and this comes off. There's tabs here. You squeeze those. That comes off. And you can access that. Unscrew that, and then the wiring's off. Okay, so you got a bolt here. A bolt here. Take those off, and then this comes off. Throw this thing away. They always crack right there, and they're useless. You don't need the damn thing. And the cover, honestly, all it is just a perfect habitat for mice to live. If you live in the city, it doesn't matter. Put the thing back on and put this back on if you want. Whatever. It makes it look pretty, right? Other than that, it's useless. It doesn't help anything. Next thing we'll do is work on removing the flow control valve. That is in my way. There we go. So this is there's a clip right here. Pull on that. That comes out. That's get the wiring out. There. Okay, so that's out. And just now we got all this crap. This usually what I'll do is I'll plug this up I'll tape it up so it doesn't get any water in it or anything. We're going to do a tune, which will eliminate this completely. But we still don't want it to get grounded out. Could cause some issues. So that's the next thing to do. Plug this up and then work on removing this flow control valve. Yet another thing that I'm going to do, I'll do it next, is this fuel head is the old style, and how you can tell is if you see this plug right here, it's narrow. It's the old style. The new one is blue. This is blue and it's wider. If you see this, replace this immediately, because these are notorious for I'm not sure the details on it, but for some reason the heater, because this has a heater right here, is the heater wiring. So that heater, I guess maybe it gets air in it, or it leaks into the heater, and or it leaks here, and then it ignites and it burns the Jeep down to the ground. So they had a huge recall on this, and I'm surprised that this is still here. Apparently the people who sold this to them had no idea. So it's things to watch out for. This needs replaced. Little footnote here. So I got to looking at the wiring. Oh, not good. That's for the fuel heater. Boy, this could have been a catastrophe. But apparently they had a horseshoe up their butt. Okay, so I've removed the fuel filter head and bracket assembly, which gives me like a ton of room back here. And you can see, let's see if I can put that in there. So this right here, this hard line right here, which runs behind the block, all that stuff's going to go away. So that's a water cooler for the fuel, the EGR fuel flow control valve. So we're going to cap that off. That's going to go away. Go away like a dodo. All the crap that makes these things dangerous and unreliable, we are getting rid of. And then this is, of course, we're going to take these 4 bolts off here. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the back. And that whole thing will come out. And we'll go from there. Another thing I do is on the oil dipstick, there's this, which secures it to one of the intake bell bolts. And by the way, these are 8mm bolts, and it makes it a huge pain in the ass. So what I do is I take a pair of pliers, I turn it 90 degrees, I put it up against here, and I score it with a knife or something, something pointed, and then I drill and tap. Once this is off, basically, I drill and tap for a separate bolt, and that way I can take the intake off without having to screw with this stupid thing. It's just if you ever have to do any service, you want to make, I always like to try to make things just a little bit easier on life. Okay, so as you can see, this thing is out, and it was an absolute nightmare. The 4 bolts that went here that go to the intake right here, one of them, this one here in the very back front, was the inside one towards the front took 2 people and like 8 extensions to get to it, and then you have to unbolt the line right here. You can see the red sealer, so that, and then it pulls out. So the next thing to come out is this pipe here, which goes around to the back of the engine and ties into the back end of the exhaust manifold back here. We'll cap off the exhaust manifold, and the kit comes with caps to cap that off, and then the flow control valve, which is right there, and the EGR cooler and all that crap's gone. It's coming out. Okay, now we move over to the timing case, timing belt case. Basically, just got to pull everything off. So you got idlers that come off. You've got the tensioner that comes off for the serpentine belt. Your power steering pump pulley has to come off. Your crankcase pulley has to come off. This can stay. And that's your vacuum pump, I think. Yeah. It's for your air conditioning. Anyways, that's yeah, just start yanking that off. So on your power steering pump, need more light. All right. So what we do is I take an extension, 3/8 extension, running through the hole, clear to the other side, and then you can remove the bolts. Okay, once you get all that stuff off and the cover off, the next thing you need to do is take this off, this plug out. That is for timing the intake cam, and then there's one on this side. You take that off, and there's a pin that goes in there. That's for timing the exhaust cam, and then there's one that goes in the bell housing for timing the crank. We'll show you that in a little bit. Okay, next thing we're going to do is time it so that we can take the timing belt off. So the first thing you need to do is go down here to the crankshaft. And there's this timing mark right here. That should be pointing at the 3 o'clock position. And if it is in the 3 o'clock position, you should be able to take these plugs out with a 5mm Allen on both sides, this one here and this one here, and put the keeper pins, which are in your kit. This is the intake, the big one. This is the exhaust, this short one. And then this one goes in your flex plate. So now, with the plug out, you should be able to take a flashlight and a mirror and look down there. And if you don't see a hole in the cam, you need to rotate the crankshaft 360 degrees till it's 3 o'clock again to get the timing in the right position. Okay, now you might need to wiggle the crankshaft back and forth a little bit. What I do is I just keep doing that and finger tighten it until it can't go anymore. And you just have to like very carefully like micro back and forth until you get that sweet spot. It's got to be tight all the way in, no gaps here, and that ensures that the intake cam is in perfect time. And the same thing for the exhaust side. Put that in there and it should just go right in. If it doesn't, and it's not in perfect alignment, you might have to wiggle this back and forth. If that still doesn't do it, it's a distinct possibility that this has slipped. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to loosen this one up. Since this one's already timed, you can loosen this up and this can turn freely by itself while everything else is still hooked up. And then you can dial it in to get this in perfect time. And then you can loosen this one up. Okay, now comes the fun one. I gotta crawl underneath the Jeep. And there's a hole right there. Right above the 218 1 or 2131F. Right there. Okay, so now you can see the lock pin in there. So another thing I know a lot of people use is an 1/8 inch extension or a drill bit of particular size, I can't remember, but those are a couple of options you can use for that. A lot of times it's because it's threaded and it's on the outside of the engine, it can get quite sticky and you'll have a tough time threading it in. So sometimes you just stick that extension in there and it works. Okay, next thing you want to do is put a 10mm ratchet on that, loosen that up, and you see that spin? That takes the tension off your belt. And if you need more tension, you just use your handy dandy timing belt tensioner wrench and you rotate it out a little more. Now it's nice and loose. Look there. Okay, timing belt out. First thing you want to look for is where cracks on the inside. This one looks like it's been used quite extensively, so I'm going to replace it. I usually just replace them anyways. It's kind of a pain in the butt to get to this point. So yeah, their belts aren't cheap, but a broken belt is really expensive. Okay, so now with the timing belt off, we're going to start pulling some things off here. These idlers we're going to replace. And they are reverse thread, so it's not righty-tighty, it's righty-loosey. We're going to take the tensioner off, because that's going to have to come off. We got to take this back plate off. So, and then I'll show you how to take those off the proper way. Okay, taking the timing gears off, cam gears. This is 11/16 or 17mm, and you need to lock the gears together, and you need a wrench like this. And this is really important because you can't totally trust that lock, and you do not want to cause any damage to your pins, or because they could bend and then you're not time anymore. There's just, so this wrench will hold that gear in place while you loosen it up. It's just an extra safety precaution. I highly recommend it. Don't take any chances. Okay, so the timing cover has 5 8mm bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the fifth one is down here, right there. And it has 3 13s. Just remember 3 13, right? So you got one here where you can't see it, another one here where you can't see it, and then one here on the outside of it that you really can't see. Next thing you're going to do, now that you have the back cover off, you're going to take the front part of the water pump off. If you've got over 100,000 miles, probably wouldn't hurt to change that out. They probably go 200,000, but I recommend at least changing the water pump every other time. And the aftermarket replacement is supposed to be even a better one, so it's longer lasting. But you'll take the front and then you'll break it in half here, and just this front half will come off, and you'll replace it with a new one. We're not going to do that because this thing's got low miles on it. The next thing we're going to tackle is removing the turbo and exhaust manifold. So the first thing you want to do is take this cover off and this heat shield off, and we'll go from there. Now with the heat shields off, you can see the whole turbo. First thing I like to do is take this bracket off right here. That bracket right there. There's 3 bolts. There's one right there, And there's two back there. One there. One on the other side of the oil drain tube. Once you take that off, there's two 10 millimeter, I believe, bolts that on the underside of the turbo to take that oil tube off, and then it'll just slide out. Once you get that turbo bracket out, you need to remove the oil drain back. And it's got one of the ends is slotted and one of them's not. So if you can get this one loose and remove this one, you might be able to get it out without taking this one out. But they're really difficult to get. They're 8 millimeter bolts. So the next thing you want to get to is that. That's the pressure line for the oil feed line to the turbo. And that's, I believe, 22 millimeter or 7/8 wrench will work on it. After you remove the block side, right here, 14 millimeter, we'll take the oil feed line to the turbo off, and then you just remove the tube. Okay, so now just be aware that there are two copper washers that go on that, one on each end. So it'll go like that when it's assembled. Don't lose those copper washers. You can get more from ID parts, but yeah, you gotta have them in there, otherwise that sucker's gonna leak. Next, we'll take a deep well, 10 millimeter. And back that off almost all the way to the end. And take off the exhaust pipe, down pipe. Okay, so the next thing is you need a deep well 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter to start pulling the turbo bolts off. And this is where that 90 comes in handy also. So it's kind of tricky to get in there without it. So there's a bunch of stuff to bust your knuckles on. This just makes it easy. And there you have it. Turbo's out. Next thing is the exhaust manifold. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to remove this and separate the EGR pipe that runs around the backside of the engine from the manifold so we can pull this out. That pipe, we'll cap it off right here and it'll go away like the dodo. Alright, so now we pull out this hose that ran around the back of the engine and throw it away. So the next thing we do is we're going to raise this up, tie it to the roof somewhere so that it's up and out of our way. And we're going to take the injector return line off, remove the fuel rail, and then I'll show you how to remove the injectors properly. Okay, so now you see when I take the cover off. Put a screwdriver in there or something, run some tie wire or something, and secure this up high enough so that you can access all the injector lines and stuff quite easily. Next thing we'll do is we'll take off this fuel line off the rail. So you want to take this one bolt out of the intake. Take that bolt out. That one's I believe 8 millimeter. This one's of course 10 millimeter. And then you need a 17 millimeter wrench on the flange. Okay, so take this off of the fuel rail. Now this comes out. Put it in with the huge pile of other stuff you have. Next, we'll take all the injector lines off, and they're marked. They'll say either 1 and 3 or 2 and 4, so you can't get them mixed up. Okay, in this case, I had to take the 3 bolts off. There's 1, 2, and then 3 to remove the rail, fuel rail, because way there in the back is a sensor. It's a rail pressure sensor, and you can't even get to it unless you take the rail off. So every rig's different. In this case, I just got to take the rail off and bring it to me to get that out. Okay, now that you got the hold down out, take a 13mm wrench, you rock that back and forth like that. That breaks the carbon up. Out she comes. Since the injectors are programmed for performance, I always mark them 1, 2, 3, and then 4 in the back. Okay, all the electricals out of the way. As you can see how I pull it up and out of the way with the tie wire, so I got plenty of room to access the intake and head. So if all else fails removing your injectors, what I do, I'll show you here. I take a, what size is this? 3/4 inch socket, you stick it in there, and you put a 15/16 inch wrench in there, and you crank on it. If that doesn't do it, you put some washers underneath it so that it's tight, like that. And then you put that wrench underneath there, and you hit it with a hammer right here as you press down, and it will come out. I guarantee it. Okay, it takes off. You can see all the crud that's inside this thing. It's pretty nasty. So that's going to need to be cleaned. Now with the intake off, you can see factory head bolts. You can inspect all the rockers. All these are on. They look like they're not broken. That's a good sign. If you got more than 150, 200,000 miles, I would replace these. But because this one's low miles, I'm not going to. Just remember, when you take these out, these need to come out. They need to go back in the same order as they came out. Okay. With the intake off, next thing we can do, now that it's easy to get to, is the glow plugs. So very carefully remove these. They tend to get hot and break, so be very careful. Now with the glow plugs off, the last thing we need is to take this hose off. That goes to the GR cooler. So we're actually going to eliminate this. When it's off, I'll put a plug in that, so we won't have to worry about that. But anyways, yeah, then we can start removing the head bolts. And when we go to do the head bolts, I like to remove them in reverse order of your torquing sequence, about 1/4 of a turn at a time. And that way you're not warping the head when you're unbolting. In case you're wanting to know, on the intake side, right here is the number of holes for the original gasket. always go with a 2-hole gasket. It's better safe than sorry. I think one of the reasons why these engines' head gaskets fail is simply because there's not enough gap for the head gasket. Some of these, I've noticed that your 4 exhaust side head bolts are looser than normal. This one here, I didn't really notice that. Maybe the 2 center ones, and when I pull this head off, I'll look at it to see if that's where the head gasket leaked. But they all were torqued pretty damn tight, so I'm assuming it's because the head gasket wasn't thick enough. Okay, with the head off, as I suspected, this is telltale of a leaky head gasket. This one here looks like it was just about ready to start leaking, or it could have already begun leaking. But that right there just means it's been compromised. Pressure from combustion worked its way into these water jacket ports, and that's why you got pressure in your coolant. So the next thing we'll do is we'll take a razor blade, gasket scraper, and we'll clean the surface of the block really good. All this corrosion around the liners needs cleaned, especially the top of it has to be cleaned. This needs to be a smooth surface. And then we will take these, the head and the intake in, and get them tanked and cleaned. That way our intakes are clean and fresh and ready to go, and it'll give us a whole lot more performance. While we're waiting for the head and intake to get cleaned, we'll want to remove the rest of the EGR crap. And again, like I said, anytime there's a plug that's getting eliminated, take some electrical tape and cover it up. You don't want to have a ground short. You'll have all kinds of electrical problems. So the EGR assembly includes the cooler and the valve. They're held onto the block by 3 bolts. 1, 2, 3, right here. So really, all you gotta do is take those off, and this whole assembly comes out. And I believe it's this lower one that wraps around and goes to the head, or excuse me, the exhaust manifold, and we'll cap that off right here, and that'll be done. Okay, all the EGR stuff is gone. Look at all that, nice and clean. Here's your block heater. For some of you have not been able to find it, that's where it is. I've literally seen them have it coiled up and zip tied right here where you cannot find it. And people think they don't have one. They do. It's there. They just hid it really well from you. So another thing I'm doing is installing a Carter lift pump. And so what I do is I take the steel line and I cut it with a powered saw, and then put in a compression fitting to a 1/4 inch pipe thread. And then from there, I'll run one of these AN6 lines. And this is basically like a vibration dampener, so that when this runs, it doesn't make a lot of noise inside the cab. And then from here, it'll go up and out, up to the filter housing.